They didn't want power. They wanted history to remember their names. Three men, one vision of control. Millions sacrificed, nations bent to ego. Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, masters of fear and ideology. This is how narcissism becomes terror. Joseph Stalin, born Ioseb Zugashvili on December 18, 1878, in Gori, Georgia, rose from obscurity to become one of the most powerful and feared dictators of the 20th century. Ruling the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953, he transformed a largely agrarian society into a global superpower at an extraordinary human cost. Stalin's early life and political formation were shaped by discipline, secrecy, and calculated ruthlessness. After joining the Bolsheviks and maneuvering skillfully within party ranks, he was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1922, a role widely viewed as administrative, but one that allowed him to construct an extensive network of loyalty and control. Within a few years, Stalin systematically outmaneuvered rivals such as Leon Trotsky, consolidating authority over both party and state. Once firmly in power, Stalin launched sweeping programs of forced industrialization, agricultural collectivization, and centralized control. While these policies accelerated industrial growth and later contributed to the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany during World War II, they also unleashed famine, repression, and mass terror. Millions died from starvation during the Ukrainian Holodomor, while countless others perished in labor camps or were executed during the Great Purge. Stalin cultivated an all-encompassing cult of personality, portraying himself as omniscient and indispensable. Statues, portraits, and state-controlled media reinforced a myth of infallibility that silenced dissent and inflated his self-image. This reverence enabled policies that ignored practical realities, crushed local leadership, and rejected alternative perspectives. His intolerance of criticism and obsession with control fueled purges that eliminated generals, scientists, and intellectuals whose expertise could have strengthened the state. By the time of his death on March 5, 1953, the Soviet Union possessed nuclear weapons and global influence, but its social fabric was deeply scarred. Stalin's final years were marked by growing isolation, mistrust, and paranoia. After suffering a stroke, he lay incapacitated for hours. Aides reportedly feared approaching him, paralyzed by the climate of terror he had created. Stalin's paranoia led him to purge millions, including allies he trusted. The reasoning is terrifying. Stalin left behind a nation that mourned publicly out of fear and privately harbored resentment. His legacy stands as a stark reminder that power fused with absolute control and narcissistic detachment from human cost produces devastation that long outlives the tyrant. Meet Adolf Hitler, 1889 to 1945. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, Austria, into a lower-middle-class family. Early failures, including rejection from art school, deeply shaped his sense of grievance and identity. After relocating to Munich, he served in World War I and later joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Through charismatic oratory and extremist ideology, Hitler capitalized on public resentment, economic despair, and nationalist humiliation following World War I, presenting himself as Germany's destined savior. Appointed chancellor in 1933, Hitler rapidly dismantled democratic institutions. Exploiting the Reichstag fire, the Enabling Act, and widespread intimidation, he consolidated absolute authority. His regime was defined by racial ideology, repression, and uncompromising loyalty demands. Hitler's self-perception grew increasingly delusional. He projected infallibility, demanded total obedience, and propagated an Aryan myth to legitimize conquest and extermination. Scholars have described his personality as marked by paranoia, antisocial behavior, and grandiose delusion, though retrospective diagnosis remains debated. Under Hitler's leadership, the Nazi regime implemented the Holocaust, systematically murdering 6 million Jews alongside millions of Romani people, disabled individuals, political opponents, and others deemed undesirable. His policies ignited World War II, resulting in tens of millions of deaths. Hitler envisioned himself not merely as a national leader, but as the architect of a new historical epic, a self-mythologizing belief central to his catastrophic impact. Hitler's speeches mesmerized crowds, but his obsession with destiny had catastrophic consequences. You won't believe the scale. As Germany's fortunes reversed following defeats at Stalingrad and Normandy, Hitler's behavior became increasingly erratic. He withdrew into the Führer bunker in Berlin, isolated from reality and surrounded by unquestioning loyalists. In late April 1945, with Soviet forces closing in, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief ceremony. On April 30th, 1945, the two committed suicide. Their bodies were burned in the garden of the Reich Chancellery as Berlin collapsed. Hitler's end, a defeated tyrant in a subterranean bunker, remains history's most extreme illustration of narcissistic catastrophism. Obsessive belief in personal destiny combined with absolute disregard for human life, culminating in total ruin. His legacy endures as a global moral reckoning that continues to shape historical consciousness. Welcome Benito Mussolini, 1883 to 1945. Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini was born on July 29, 1883, in Predappio, Italy, and became the founding architect of fascism, an ideology rooted in authoritarianism, nationalism, and personal cult leadership. His ascent from journalist and socialist agitator to dictator illustrates how charisma, fused with narcissistic authority, can fracture an entire nation. In the instability following World War I, Mussolini exploited fear, economic dislocation, and wounded national pride, presenting himself as the singular figure capable of restoring Italy's greatness. In 1922, he orchestrated the March on Rome, a performative political coup that compelled King Victor Emmanuel III to invite him to form a government. This moment marked Mussolini's transformation from political provocateur to Il Duce, the leader. Once entrenched, Mussolini centralized power rapidly. Democratic institutions were dismantled, dissent was crushed, the press was controlled, and the state was elevated above individual rights. Propaganda portrayed him as both paternal protector and military genius, reinforcing a narcissistic belief in his own indispensability. Mussolini insisted on theatrical displays of authority, uniforms, rallies, grand titles that amplified his sense of personal supremacy. Mussolini's charm masked violence. His personal ego drove entire nations to war. His alliance with Adolf Hitler further exposed his worldview, a belief that power, spectacle, and obedience justified reckless geopolitical ambition. Italy's entry into World War II on the Axis side was driven less by strategic calculation than by ego, a bid for historical relevance and personal validation. Military failures in North Africa and the Balkans shattered morale, exposed strategic incompetence, and eroded faith in the Duce's myth of infallibility. By 1943, Italy's war effort had collapsed. Mussolini was deposed by the king and arrested. Though German forces later rescued him and installed him as leader of a puppet state in northern Italy, his authority was hollow, a performance without power. In April 1945, as Allied forces advanced, Mussolini attempted to flee with his mistress, Clara Petacci. They were captured by Italian partisans and executed on April 28, 1945. Their bodies were publicly displayed in Milan's Piazzale Loreto, a brutal symbol of fallen narcissism and national betrayal. Mussolini's end was not a dignified fall, but a violent exposure of the fragility beneath authoritarian bravado, a warning of how self-aggrandizement and historical delusion lead inevitably to ruin. And some followers were even more dangerous than the leaders. Next episode, we explore how some narcissists don't just rule nations, They engineer genocide.